Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum, guys.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Okay, that's really good.
Alaikum
Thank you. Alaikum salam. Oh, I'm glad I'm not alone. All right, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Bari'il Khalaq Ajma'een. والصلاة والسلام على رسوله وحبيبه أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, in this section where we are talking about comparative religion, the first religion we are going to touch on is what is called the oldest religion of mankind, which is the religion of Hinduism. That is somewhat sort of reinforced by statements in our religion. They said that Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, when he came to earth, he came to Sri Lanka. And there have been indications about this very same reality. So what we want to do is we want to look at Hinduism and see how Hinduism can be understood from an Islamic point of view. Now, when we look at Hinduism, and I think it's very important too, because a lot of people in Trinidad are Hindus, so it would be very important to understand what Hinduism is. Now, my approach to world religions is not like a Salafi, okay? It is guided by a couple of principles in Islam. First of all, Islam believes, as the Holy Quran says, that Allah sent messengers to every community. Every community in the world had messengers, okay? A messenger or more than one. And that all the messengers taught the same thing, okay? The oneness of God, the messengership of that particular prophet, and a path towards Allah, which goes through personal responsibilities, social responsibilities, and responsibilities towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That being said, it does not mean, when we say that, for example, they have the belief, teaching the belief in God, it does not mean that the language used, the concepts used, and so on are going to be exactly the same as what we use in Islam. For example, when we look, and we will be looking at Buddhism to a greater, after Hinduism, when we look at Buddhism, we find that on the surface, it seems that Buddhism does not have a personal God. When I say a personal God, I mean a God that interacts with people, a God who is a person. Okay, I say personal God doesn't mean your personal God. Huh? We mean God as person. God wants this from us. God does not want that from us. God is pleased when we do something good. God is displeased when we do something good. and so forth and so on. And of course, according to theology, Islamic theology, when we say God is pleased, it does not mean that God changes state, that it was a moment when God was sort of neutral and you did something good and goes, oh, great, that's a good idea. I'm so glad. Meaning a change in internal state. God does not change state. When we talk about God being pleased, what we mean is the consequences of our deeds, the consequences of our beliefs lead to either happiness in this world. And when we say happiness in this world, it doesn't mean to say that you wouldn't suffer, right? Or it can lead to wretchedness in this world and the hereafter. This is what God means. It means by God being pleased or angry. This is the idea of a personal God. So when we look at Buddhism, for example, I don't want to jump the gun. When we look at Buddhism, for example, we see that there is no indication of a personal God. Okay, Taoism is the same thing. The ancient religion of China, is the same thing. But when we look closer, we see that Buddhism talks about reality, ultimate reality, okay, transcendental reality. That's it. That is what God is, in an ocean of being, put it that way. Okay, an endless, shoreless ocean of being. And like in the words of Lao Tzu, the founder or the prophet of Taoism, he talks about this world of being in terms of the Tao, sometimes spelled T-A-O, and that this world of being is so vast that we cannot, or it defies definition or even a name. Lao Tzu says that Tao is the source of all names and transcends names. Okay, so in Buddhism, when we talk about nirvana, when we talk about the practice of meditation and so forth, what is that to do? To empty the mind. And then what flows into that gap in the mind? Well, being itself, that transcendental, eternal and everlasting being that actually fulfills you. And where you become enlightened, then you become aware of the true reality of the world. So we have things like this in Islam, especially in mystical Islam, Irfan or Sufism, where we talk about Allah as God that we know, the personal God, the sum total of all the names and so on. And at the same time, we meditate on the name Hu, right? Hu, meaning him. Why does it mean him? Why are we not giving it a name? It is because that word Hu is the name of the essence of Allah, which is completely unknown. Nevertheless, when we drown in that name, when we lose our egos in that name, very much like meditation in Buddhism and Taoism and so forth, we attain what? Enlightenment. In this case, we attain something what you might call yaqeen in the words of the great ulama. Yaqeen means certitude, certitude in terms of being able to witness those things that we only believe in. And so we find that Buddhism would have a different approach then to the sublime ultimate reality that at the same time conforms with one aspect of our understanding of the sublime reality. Now, when we go to prophets, for example, it is the same thing. Now, we tend to see prophets, well, not we, the usual Muslim tend to see prophets just as we see the Abrahamic prophets. Indeed, sometimes some of us go even further and become even more limited upon ourselves by denying any religion that did not have the Abrahamic prophets. Well, I mean, the Abrahamic prophets appeared in one particular geographical location. Okay, that is the area of Palestine, and one could probably include Egypt on that level. And they are all, by definition, the Judeo-Christian and Islamic prophets are all linked back to Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam as his descendants. But of course, we have prophets that are not Abrahamically linked. We have, for example, the prophets before Hazrat Ibrahim. For example, Hazrat Nuh was a prophet, but he was not a descendant of Hazrat Ibrahim, and so on. And when we look at this particular reality, we see that we have to apply the word prophet in a very general sense as a messenger or a person who brings a transcendental truth to people that results in the creation of a religion. And so you'd find in Hinduism, what would be equivalent to prophets would be the avatars. In Buddhism, it would be the bodhisattvas, and so on. All of them have this particular function of introducing a religion or preserving that religion over time. So we have to sort of, to be able to understand the universality of religion, we have to really come outside the box and see these religions both from their perspective and also from an Islamic perspective, having respect for them, and in this way, probably learning something from them. The other thing that we have to keep in mind as well is that religions have a lifespan. Most religions have a lifespan. And this is why, the Holy Quran talks about God sending prophets in succession to guide humanity. And one of the characteristics of the agedness of a religion is what we would call idolatry. Okay, what we call idolatry, or what we would also call the loss of the wisdom aspect in the religion to be able to benefit from it. And so you'd find that and Hinduism would be a case in point. Christianity also would be a case in point, where people who were once prophets or avatars are now seen as gods themselves. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. And by being able to sift through those religions, we are able to discover a beautiful internal truth in these religions. So this is how Islam approaches religion. This is how I approach religion. Okay, and it's for this reason you find Islam, classical Islam, being one of the most, or the most tolerant religion the world has ever seen. It is a religion that looks at other religions to see what they can learn from them. And this does not decrease our religion itself, but what we can learn from them. And out of this, we find that in classical Islam, because of that respect for religions, it resulted in the development of Islamic thought. I mean, take, for example, the philosophy of the Greeks, Greek philosophy, Aristotelian, Platonic, and so on, philosophy. The Muslims didn't look at this Greek philosophy and say, well, these Greeks are pagans, they are polytheists, and so on, so I have nothing to learn from them. The Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, a very, very interesting statement. I mean, I'm sure you all are aware of it. He said, seek knowledge even unto China. Seek knowledge even unto China. China here represents what? It represents one the furthest place you can go to find knowledge. It says, because knowledge is a lost property or the lost inheritance of the Muslims. Okay, so seek knowledge unto China. Well, what was China at the time? Well, China was Buddhist at the time. Did China have a secular system, like what we have today, where you go to school and you learn stuff that has nothing to do with religion directly? Did China have that? No, a secular system is something quite modern, very recently introduced, in the educational systems of Western countries and now also third world, non-Western countries. So when he says seek knowledge unto China, okay, even unto China, we're talking about seeking Buddhist knowledge. This is what he's talking about, with the caveat that we can use the discriminating faculty of Tawheed, which means, we should know Tawheed on a deep level, not on a superficial level, that you can find truth among these people. Okay, so Islam is never hostile to religion as such. Once that religion is, how should I say, a remnant, at least, of what came before. Now, going into Hinduism, there are a number of wants. For example, I'd like to start with a number of wants that Hinduism considers that lead up to the realization of divine truth. Okay, so Hinduism asks really, what do people want? What do people want? And when one considers that question, we say that people want four things. And the first thing that they want is pleasure. Okay, first thing that people want is pleasure. And this is something quite natural, because all of us are born with built-in pleasure and pain receptors. All of us, the pleasure and pain receptors in our fingertips. You can caress something like a nice, soft woolen blanket, and it'd feel quite nice under your hand. Or you could put your hand in fire, and again, you get burnt. You see? So all of us at the beginning of everything try to avoid pain and also go towards pleasure. This is something quite natural. And what Hinduism would say would be, well, yeah, go after pleasure. There's nothing wrong with it. It's one of the four legitimate ends in life. This world has so many beautiful things, so many sensual things that we can delight in. And then, in the worlds above this world, pleasure is even magnified by millions of times, if one can call it this. With each rung, with each level that we go, pleasure is magnified. And we can see this also in the teachings of Islam. You have, for example, it says that in, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam says that the majority of the activities of the people of paradise is sexual activity, for example. You have a hadith, I believe, by the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says one orgasm in paradise would last 400 years. 400 years. What is it? I mean, these are symbolic words, not necessarily 400 years. Could be something much greater than that. But he's giving an example. And these are pleasures. These are pleasures. You see, so Hinduism is not anti-pleasure. It's not anti-pleasure at all. You find the anti-pleasure starting to arise in things like Christianity and so forth. But Hinduism is pro-pleasure. But to seek pleasure, of course, requires good sense. You have to obey the laws of basic morality. Once you do that, you're free to seek all the pleasure you want. Far from condemning pleasure, Hindu texts indeed show how to enlarge its scope. And for most simple people, they seek pleasure almost exclusively. And they see Hinduism as nothing more than a regimen for ensuring health and prosperity. And for the sophisticated people, like the nobility and so forth, it would elaborate a sensual aesthetic, like the Kama Sutra and so forth, that would be quite shocking in its explicitness. So Hinduism would have these measures, these ways for you to go towards pleasure. If pleasure is what you want, then you do not suppress the desire, but one must seek it intelligently. You can't, for example, let's say you want pleasure, so you would, let's say, rape somebody or take away their rights, and things like that. You can't seek pleasure in getting addicted to something where it would destroy you and so forth. Be very careful about how you seek pleasure. And if you seek pleasure on a level like that, if you follow the rules, if you obey the law, if you strive not to oppress people and hurt people and so forth, it's very, very, okay to pursue pleasure within the Hindu culture. One must be intelligent in seeking pleasure. For example, sometimes to find a greater pleasure, we have to give up lesser pleasures. We have to sacrifice lower pleasures in order to arrive at a higher pleasure. So you might get pleasure in, for example, I don't know, playing a video game or something like that out for fun. You're not a gamer or anything like that. Doing it for fun. And you might spend a lot of time on that, but you're wasting the time that you should be using to arrive at a higher pleasure. So from the Hindu point of view, and also from an Islamic point of view, there was a time when Islam was considered by Christians, interestingly enough, because to Christians, pleasure was an enemy to many of the Christian fathers. Islam, when it was talking about having 4 wives, experiencing the life of this world as a beautiful thing and so forth, they would criticize Islam for being hedonistic. But as we see in Hinduism, pleasure is something very much rooted in the human being itself. So pleasure is not wicked, but pleasure can be very trivial to satisfy one's total nature, because our total nature is not one that is restricted to our physical bodies. Pleasure is something that is essentially private. It's the individual that enjoys pleasure. And therefore, the self could be too small as an object to be always going after pleasure. The more you go after pleasure, the smaller yourself becomes, because that's all that you become identified by. So pleasure would have its limitations. And you find that many, many times that people who are indulging in a particular pleasure, after a while, they get bored of it, they get tired of it. Is this all it is? And so forth. What more is there for me to have? There was a time when I used to, in my teenage years, used to hang on the streets of Toronto, hanging out with my friends and so forth and so on. And one of the things that we noticed about guys who used to be very good at picking up girls is after a while, it became so easy for them that they were no longer interested in picking up girls. They became interested in picking up men. Yeah, that's how it goes. Okay, these are the limitations of pleasure. So pleasure itself has a limitation. The biggest limitation of pleasure is the actual self of the person. If you are, attached to pleasure, yourself doesn't grow. So there's a limitation in seeking pleasure and or making your life one only for seeking pleasure. And this brings us to the second major goal of life. The second major goal of life is worldly success. This is something higher than just pleasure, worldly success, which is with its three branches of wealth, fame, and power. This again, too, is a worthy goal, neither to be scorned or condemned. Why? Because for one thing, its satisfactions last much longer than pleasure, and success is a social achievement, and as such, it involves the lives of others, where pleasure, on the other hand, is a private experience. And therefore, this, seeking worldly success is something much wider than pleasure, and also it is vastly more important. And when we look at worldly success, we realize that this is something, again, that all people are hardwired to accept, to manifest. For example, this, the smallest level of worldly success is important to support a household. How can you support a household if you're not working? How could you own a house, for example, without some kind of training to be able to improve yourself, to increase your income, and so on, so you can own a house, you see? So you require some aspect of this idea of wealth and power and social recognition and so forth that are necessary for you to live. And again, you find in Islam does not criticize or condemn the rich. It never does that. The problem you might have as a rich person is being attached to your wealth. And for example, in Islam, we do not define asceticism. And asceticism, if who might not know, in ASCETICISM, for those who don't know, asceticism is, turning your back on the world and, for God, right? But an ascetic doesn't even have to be a religious person or even a believer in God. For example, Fidel Castro was an ascetic. Che Guevara was an ascetic. Many revolutionaries are ascetics in the sense that, they tend to be not very much interested in chasing after pleasures, and being surrounded by possessions and so forth. So even taking care of a family it makes it necessary for somebody to be successful in what they're doing, to be promoted in what they're doing, to be advancing in the world and so forth, in order to arrive at a particular level of worldly power. I mean, I'm talking about oppressive power now, worldly power over your life and so forth, to be able to be secure as much as one can be in the society that they are in. If you want to discharge our civic duties, for example, we require some power to do this. We require resources to do these things. And again, these are also very important in this second aspect of asking the question, what do people want? Well, this level of wanting worldly success and pleasure and fame and so forth. So beyond the minimum that you need to be able to run a house, for example, worldly achievements confer dignity and self-respect. Dignity and self-respect. When you do not go beyond, let's say, a kind of a subsistence type of life, you don't really get dignity and self-respect from the society. And I'm speaking in superficial terms now. all right? But moving ahead in life and so forth, bring that with it for you. But like pleasure, seeking worldly success also has a limitation. For example, wealth, fame, and power are exclusive. Hence, they are competitive, and therefore they are dangerous. You know, if you cannot have, let's say, there's no such thing as a concept of wealth in a society where everybody's poor, or a society where all the wealth is redistributed to everybody equally. You can't have this. Wealth doesn't exist in a society like that. You know, wealth is something comparative. X is wealthy and Y is not, or Y is less wealthy. You see, so they are exclusive. The more you socialize these things, the more they become meaningless, because they do not have something to compare to. And you can see, for example, in, let's say, some communist countries, when you look at communist countries, which are like, Vietnam, the ex-Soviet Union, China, and so forth. When you look at these old communist countries, you find that even though they preach the redistribution of wealth, and preach something akin to, let's say, making everybody equally wealthy, right, or everybody equally poor, you would find that in these communist societies, naturally, you would see the growth of particular classes that don't fall under the communist radar, and these social classes tend to be, many times, the managers of state enterprises, people in government and so forth, which could amass, quite a lot of wealth. I mean, China, for example, on one hand, has conceded to this principle, the wealth, fame, and power principle, and has become quite successful in creating a very powerful capitalist class in a communist country that has been doing it, a great deal of service, you see. So it shows that this desire for wealth, fame, and power cannot be suppressed by any kind of system that claims that it wants to change that. What you can change is, again, like in pleasure, seeking pleasure, the morals that go along with wealth, fame, and power. How you could get that wealth, fame, and power, or those people who possess wealth, fame, and power, to be also of service to the society. And one of the ways they do that is like through taxation, for example. And a very prominent thing that we are becoming more and more cognizant about is that in the Western world, rich people are not taxed. It's only the poor and the middle class are being taxed. And this is an injustice. So the problem with wealth, fame, and power is, like, unlike mental and spiritual values, okay? Unlike values like for example, knowledge and intelligence and so forth, a person might not be powerful in society, they might not be famous, they might not have wealth, but they have knowledge. And many times in Islam, we talk about knowledge as being a very, 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 the most important possession or wealth that you can have. That verse, verse of the Holy Quran that we use in our dua, Rabbana a'tina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina adhaban nar. Oh Allah, give us hasana, give us good in this life, and give us hasana in the next, and save us from the torment of the fire. I believe it's a hadith by Imam Ali alayhi salam, or the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. I can't remember exactly, but he said that this hasana is wisdom. Okay, because wisdom can get you wealth. Wisdom can make you not be a victim of your own wealth. Wisdom can get you power, but wisdom cannot would prevent you from being addicted to power and so forth. So unlike mental and spiritual values, wealth, fame, and power, for example, do not multiply when shared. Mental values, or like knowledge, for example, they multiply when shared. When you are, I don't know how many of you guys have ever experienced teaching, or one of the things that I experience in teaching is every single time that I teach something, even as a particular class that I have been teaching for the last 2, 3, 4 years, I always learn something when I'm teaching the students. Okay, because somebody asks a question and has a different mind, a different configuration going on there. So when they ask this question, sometimes you are forced to think outside of your box. You learn something. Okay, so knowledge, when you share it, increases. This is what we believe in Islam. You never lose knowledge when you share it with somebody. Spiritual teaching is something that you increment when you teach others or when you guide others. Okay, so spirituality does not diminish when you guide other people. Okay, so if I own $1, it's my dollar. It's not yours. If I'm sitting in a chair, that's my seat in the chair. You don't occupy it. Fame and power are the same. One person is famous because another is not famous. You see, a person can become more famous than that person. But again, when you become more famous than that person that you're more famous than cannot occupy your seat while you are that famous. So, you can have a whole nation where everybody is famous. It's a contradiction in terms, because famous means somebody stands out from the crowd. All right. So when we look at these things like, wealth and fame and power and so on, they are mutually exclusive. Sorry, they are exclusive to other people. They're not exclusive to everyone. You see, and because of this, they are very precarious. They are full of competition. When you're looking to gain wealth, for example, you have to compete with other people who want the same wealth. When you want to, gain fame and fortune and so forth, again, there are people who you have to compete with, and you have to stand out against the crowd. And because of this, because we know all other people want these things too, it's easy for them to change hands. You cannot remain famous forever. You cannot remain wealthy forever, and so on. And as we will see later on, wealth, for example, is something quite relative. Now, with respect to success, the drive for success is insatiable. When people are trying to get more money and more fame and more power and so forth, when they make these things their chief ambition, their lusts cannot be satisfied. Because, they can never get enough of what they are seeking. There's a Hindu idiom that says to try to extinguish the drive for riches with money is like trying to quench a fire by pouring butter over it. Okay? People just want more and more and more. And this is because they are not guided, they are not controlled in this particular activity. They are always looking to aggrandize, to increase their own wealth and their own power. And wealth becomes very, very relative. In Islam, for example, and Hinduism as well, wealth has a relationship with contentment, and poverty has a relationship with discontent. So a wealthy person, a billionaire, who wants to multiply his billions, sees himself as poorer than a billionaire who has more billions than him. So it's this relative thing that is taking place, this ego thing that is taking place, that militates against being free of that thing. And after a while, for example, you might be very, very wealthy, have lots of money. After a while, money has no value to you. And you treat it like garbage. You treat it like all them Saudis, throw away money in Las Vegas casinos and things like that. And Islam teaches that. Islam teaches us that contentment is basically wealth. The other problem, the third problem, that worldly success is the same as the problem with hedonism. Okay, hedonism is the individual obsession with seeking pleasure. And because of this, it centers on the self. It centers on the self, or the nafs of the individual, which is too small to be able to be only focused on this type of thing. In fact, the focusing on this thing only by itself shrinks the nafs, shrinks the sense of self, and prevents one from being able to see beyond with the eyes of wisdom. The fourth reason why worldly success cannot satisfy us completely is that its achievements are ephemeral, meaning that they fade away. Wealth, fame, and power do not survive bodily death. We say in the West, you can't take it with you. And since we cannot, this keeps us from being satisfied wholly, because we are creatures who can envision eternity. And because we can envision eternity, okay, this is a very deep statement. Because a human being can envision eternity, means that a human being has a deeper capacity for transcending this world. And so human beings would be thinking in this sense that, I'm going to die soon and I'm going to lose all of this. Then what really is this for? This is limited. Last week I was at a barber's, and I'm sitting in a chair, and he's a good friend of mine, and the barber asked me, what is life? He asked me, what is life? I said to him, well, life is an opportunity. He said, wow, and he pulled out some meme in his thing and said something, some famous person said the same thing, I withheld myself because I didn't want to sound too preachy. What opportunity is there in life that is present for us to take advantage of? And alhamdulillah, he said it. He said the opportunity to do good. That is the opportunity. Life is an opportunity to do good, and leading on to that, to be able to meet God. That's what life is all about. You see? So you'd find that because human beings can envision eternity, it means then that human beings can see the limitation of wealth, fame, and power. Now, pleasure for Hindus is located on the path of desire. It's called the path of desire. And they use this phrase because personal desires of the individual have been foremost in charting the life course of other people. And that nothing should be gained by repressing our desires. Nothing should be gained by repressing our desires, and even by pretending to repress our desires. Your desires have to be pursued. Now that might sound kind of hedonistic, but it is not. Why it's not hedonistic is because hedonism is about focus. It's about obsession with the achievement of pleasure, right? Whereas in life, we do seek pleasure by avoiding pain, and we do seek pleasure for its own stead. And if channeled or controlled by morality, then there's no problem to that. But, just seeking pleasure is not the best thing. The pleasure itself has a limitation in it. So how do we move away from this path of desire? The guiding principle is not to turn from desire until desire turns from you. Not to turn away from desire, but to have desire turn away from you. And one of the ways that they look at the things on the path of desire, they see them as if they were toys. If you look at toys, for example, you ask, well, what's wrong with toys? Well, for a child, there's nothing wrong with toys. Children love to play with toys. When their toys are broken or when they lose their toys and so forth, children are sad. Now let's imagine an adult that is still interested in dolls and trains, for example, an adult. That's pretty sad. That adult has not moved beyond that childish phase of, an infant or a child playing with their toys, and so these individuals, in terms of those who are addicted to pleasure, just, continue in life, identifying and immersing themselves in that pleasure, just like an adult who is still addicted to playing with toys. Instead of outgrowing them, meaning your spirit outgrowing them. So what is greater than the path of pleasure then? The Hindus would say one thing that is greater than the path of pleasure is the path of renunciation. Renunciation means, is a very beautiful word, Christian word. To renounce something means to revoke it, okay? And it's to revoke something that you once identified with. So if, say, for example, somebody was an SS Nazi in World War II, before they got captured, they studied and so forth and asked questions and all of that. And they say, now I renounce my Nazism, meaning I turn my back on this, all right? So renouncement has a personal type of face. And it has also a higher type of face. So the first one, the lower one, is when you renounce something because of things like disillusionment and despair. Like, for example, a man is very much in love with a particular person, a particular woman. He finds that love he has for that woman rebuffed by her. He's so hurt and devastated that he becomes a monk and joins a monastery and says, I'm never going to be dealing with women again. This is a kind of renunciation, but it's a renunciation that comes from disillusionment and despair. You are convinced now that you can never get that thing that you want, so you turn away from it. There's a very interesting Persian saying that says, when the cat cannot get at the meat in the pot, the cat says, the meat smells, man. Right? It's a kind of a renunciation. Okay. This guy who can't get the girl, he would say, look, women are all the same. I really don't need this headache. I'm going to be a priest and I'm going to give up women. So that's one aspect of renunciation. Religious renunciation is like that of athletes, who resist indulgences that could deflect them from their all-consuming goal. An athlete, for example, let's say he has to run a very big competition next week. He'd be training all now. People want to say, let's go have some pizza. Nah, I got to go to bed, that type of stuff. He rejects these minor pleasures that he sees that would come between him and running. Okay, religious renunciation is something like that, where you forego things in the life of this world in order to increase your presence in the life of the next world. So the Hindu's path of renunciation comes after the path of desire. And it makes sense because you cannot renounce something unless you have had a desire for it. You can't renounce something unless you have had a desire for it. Okay, so you have to go to renunciation from the path of desire. It doesn't say that everyone in their lives would find the path of desire limited. It doesn't say that. You have people who do not find it limiting, and they die that way. But Hinduism realizes that the path of desire is limited, and that what happens then is that people would eventually come to realize this sooner rather than later. And it has a very fast time scale where people come to realize this, and they use reincarnation as one of the paths by which people eventually arrive at wisdom and some kind of transcendence. Now, inshallah, we will talk about reincarnation because Islam has a very, very important point of view on reincarnation. And there is some truth in reincarnation, not reincarnation into this world, I must add. Okay, there's some truth in reincarnation, but it is many times distorted, even in Hinduism itself and in Buddhism, as something that is this world focused. Okay, when you contemplate the changes that takes place to the human presence in the barzakh and on the day of judgment, where our even our bodies themselves change to reflect the good deeds or the bad deeds in our lives. You'd find that people in the barzakh, some people in the barzakh would look like monsters, some people in the barzakh would look like beautiful angels, and so forth and so on. This is a kind of a reincarnation. Indeed, for example, we call this a phenomenon called the tajassumul af'al. Tajassumul af'al. Tajassum means making into a jism, making into a body, right? Making it the deeds being made into bodies. All right, this is what it means, tajassum. In other words, in the akhirah, starting from the barzakh, your deeds take form. Corporealization of deeds. Corporealization of deeds. Corpora comes from the word corpus, which means the body, means body, right? Corporealize means assuming a bodily form. Okay? So we have this phenomenon that takes place in the barzakh and also takes place on the Day of Judgment. You have a hadith by the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he says, when the body is in the grave, a beautiful youth will emerge from between the body of the person and the shroud. And the dead person will ask that being, who are you? And that being will say, it depends on the hadith, he will say, I'm your good deeds. Or he'll say, I'm the Quran you used to read, that you used to love, and that I will be with you for this entire journey of yours, until the Day of Judgment. Okay. This is the corporealization, okay, or one could call it the incarnation, corporealization, incarnation, same thing, right? Carne, incarno, incarni. Carne means meat, right? Incarn means to put in meat, to put a soul in meat, for example, So there's this corporalization of deeds that take place. One, on an objective level, meaning outside the being, outside the self of the dead person. Okay, and two, a corporalization of deeds on the figure, on the body of the deceased person. The deceased person will appear in a certain way that could be hideous or it could be attractive. So we have this, but we have it on a different dimension, on a different level. It does not take place on the earth. Now, we have, I'm sure you guys might have read every now and then in passing about some little child who was brought into a particular city that he was never there before, and they go to a building and the child says, I used to live here 200 years ago. People will be shocked. What? And then the child will say something like, well, yeah, and I used to play upstairs and I hid my drawing book, under the floorboards in the bedroom upstairs to the right, and when they go up there, they lift up the floorboards. Well, there's the book. And so they say, oh, well, yeah, he was here 200 years ago. We're going to answer that question. Okay, it's not as it seems. Okay, but you'd find that, for example, many of these things in the path of desire, people will start realizing that, look, hey, this is not enough. I need to do some more. This is not what life is all about. Because, when you are involved in that life, in the path of desire, every attainment seems to fan the flames of a new desire. None satisfies fully. And eventually there comes this suspicion that people are caught on a treadmill having to run faster and faster for rewards that mean less and less. So you have a lot of cases in point where you have, rich people, doing really good in business, working on the stock market and so on, leave it, okay? And they devote their lives to something else. They devote their lives to charitable things. They spend all their money on charitable things and so forth and so on, because they are looking for something more. They realize that this type of life is vain. And when you reach that point, when you say, well, okay, this life is vain, man. What is this? I mean, is this all? I go to work, I work at home or whatever, I'm just making money upon money. Is this all that life is? When that question is asked, okay, this question announces the birth of religion. Because in a certain sense, they were worshiping themselves. Allah says in the Holy Quran, have you seen that person who has made themselves their God, their self, their God? And true religion begins with a quest for meaning and value beyond being self-centered, okay? And renounces the claims of the ego to finality, because the ego's claims is that there is a finality to life, okay? And it renounces that, you leave that. This is when true religion comes into being. Is this all life is all about? When somebody can ask that question, all right, then that person becomes open to religion. Okay, it's about 11:20 my time here. I'd like to stop here for now. And we take that up again next Friday. But if there's any questions, inshallah, we were ready to answer them. Okay, inshallah. Looking forward to seeing you guys again on Brother Jafar is what, Monday, right? Or Tuesday. Alaikum salam.
I have a question on what you spoke about.
Yeah.
Just to recap what you said about Hinduism. You said Hinduism had four questions about what people want, right?
Right.
Two of them were pleasure and worldly success, right? Which is wealth, fame, and power.
Yes. Well, the question was, what do people want? Right. And one is pleasure, the other one is worldly power.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you said there were four.
The four, yes. We'll be going through them one by one and just taking them, exhausting each one before we go to the next one.
Oh, okay. So we didn't reach the other two yet. Okay.
Yes, that's right.
All right. I was just making sure. I thought I missed it.
No. It's okay.
Okay. All right. Shukran.
Yeah. So is that it? Let me see. Okay, let's look at some of the questions here. Okay. Yeah, there's a recording. Somebody asked if there was a recording. You're having internet problems. Yeah, you check Brother Jafari for that, inshallah. All right, my dear brothers and sisters, inshallah, I will see you again next week. Brother Jafari, we're talking about I can't remember exactly, Monday, isn't it? Yeah, okay, so I'll see you on Monday for theology, inshallah. Okay, so assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Wa alaikum salam. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.